Spring has come in East Devon. As I go out to observe the rapid greening of my favourite places, I lament that I'm behind in my project, and in the studio I'm still working on pages to describe the start of February. My name is Alex Boone. I'm a nature artist, specialising in nature journals. I teach nature journaling at naturejournalingcircle.com. Today I'm going to show you inside creating some new pages in my journal. I've been making pages based on flower and leaf pressings to celebrate the new leaves and the coming of spring. First, let's rewind to a month or so ago, to my garden in February. I wanted to make a page to celebrate the emergence of the first celandine flower of the year, which happened here at the end of January. I love to use natural materials in my journal, so I carefully gathered handfuls of celandine flowers from the garden and took them inside to press. I'm laying them flat, several pages worth of them, and trimming the stems right down to the base of the flower so they don't get in the way in the pressing process. I need some more blotting paper sheets for my next batch of pressings, so using my cardboard as a template, I carefully cut some new sheets out from the blotting paper roll. I'm using a Stanley knife and a cutting mat for this. Because I've used a roll of blotting paper, it can't really be convinced to stop being a roll, so I've rolled it up the other way and then pressed it flat. Once it's in the press with all these flowers, it should be flat properly in no time at all. Now I'm back out in the garden, gathering more materials for another journal page I'd like to do, all relating to the emergence of new leaves in my garden. I'm gathering bitter cress and primroses, including the small leaves in the centre. I'm trying to get whole plants. Since this is my garden, it doesn't really matter too much if I pull a few up. I've got celandine leaves in here too. Now I'm laying them all out flat, getting them all kind of together, nicely organised into my flower press. It makes it a little bit easier if I put all of the bits together from one plant, so I know based on my reference images precisely how I want the plant to look. With this bitter cress, I'm carefully removing the leaves, bit by bit, laying them all together in the press, even the smallest ones, so I can try to reassemble this plant in a natural looking state in my journal later on. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. The pressings alone won't quite do though. I need to do a painting in the background so I can lay the pressings on top and make some sort of realistic scene. That's kind of what I'm going for in this particular journal spread. I have a reference image of the side of the studio, and I'm going to try and paint this, putting loads of water first onto my page. This journal can withstand a whole lot of water addition, so I'm not too worried about really laying it on thick. I'm using my Derwent Inktense Studio Pan set for this, mixing up the colours first, and then getting them blotted onto those very wet pages. Now I'm using a mixture of colours, mainly comprising burnt umber and Payne's grey, to make a kind of soil-like effect. I'm going to actually plant my pressings into this soil. If you want to find out a little bit more about how to paint these backgrounds and how to do these techniques with your flower pressings, I have a special class for that at naturejournalingcircle.com. There's a link in the description to the specific class. It's available to buy separately, or you can just join the membership and have access to all my classes and my live tutorials. I'm now painting the wood. Funny thing to be doing, but I'm painting the patterns in the wood on the side of the studio, trying to make it look like wooden boards. And since my studio's a little weathered, I need to put on some algae too, so I'm just painting on some green now. Also in my studio is a lot of ivy. I'm kind of letting it alone to climb up the sides of the studio a little bit. My studio is set next to some trees, and so the ivy kind of fits right in here. I'm painting this in very carefully, using the tip of this brush, and I'm going to be using a mixture of different greens. I don't want these leaves to look too realistic. They're only kind of background. The realism will come from using the real pressed leaves, which will be planted down just at the front. I'm adding a few more details in now, just the planks and the knots in the wood, and further details into the soil itself. Most of this won't be visible underneath the pressed flowers, but it's still nice to give it a bit of texture. Now I've got to let this dry. It's a few weeks later now, and I'm ready to open up the press again and see what the results are like. We've got some beautiful long stringy celandine leaves, and some primrose leaves too, and the bittercress is looking particularly good. It's funny because that's such a prolific weed, it's quite nice to find a bit of a decent use for it. First thing I need to do here is to try and reassemble the primrose, just how I saw it when I pulled it out of the soil a few weeks ago. I have a reference photograph on my phone, and I can use this to help me position the leaves accurately. Now that that one's there, I've got to rearrange all of the leaves, take them out of the press and decide where I want them to be on the page. This is a fun part of the process. Sometimes I go through a few iterations before I decide exactly how I want it to look, but I had a bit of a design in mind with these long celandine leaves up the top. Now I'm going to get all of these glued in. I'm using EVA glue again, it's my absolute favourite. It's a neutral glue, it is water reversible, and it's very flexible so it doesn't gum the pages up too much and stop them from turning effectively. It's a slow and careful process, putting down all of this glue. I'm putting it on top of and underneath each of these leaves, and carefully using my brush to make sure that I am definitely gluing them down properly, and that there's no flapping edges coming up that may catch later and cause tears in my work. I'm quite happy how this little page came out. A celebration of the first emergence of leaves at the end of January in my garden. I've been in my flower press, getting all of last summer's pressings out. I'm popping them into here. This is my scraps box. It's where I keep all of my spare papers, pressings, and I'm just putting my envelopes of last year's ones in here, ready to go, because I'm about to show you another way that I like to use leaf and flower pressings in my nature journals. This is my practice journal. Again, using a wet brush technique, I'm going to be dabbing loads of interesting colour onto here, making an interesting dappled background in which I'm going to lay my pressings in a fun and unique kind of pattern. Something a little bit different, inspired by the arrangements made by Victorian women for the most part. I have a little bit of a passion for the Victorian and the Edwardian periods. It seemed to be a time when people were really using their creativity to depict the natural world. But I've gone bright and luminous here. I don't want it to look too dated after all. If you want to see more about how to do this technique, it's all included in that class, just linked in the description below. I've emptied out that summer envelope again, and I'm just going to lay out all of these leaves, all of the things that I would like to put on this page, and just decide kind of vaguely where I might want them to go. This one I'm not trying to be too technical, I'm not trying to make it look like a realistic plant design. I just kind of want to make something a bit more artistic and fun. I'm not trying to do anything with symmetry here, just getting all of these onto the page and trying to let some of that background show through. Once again, I'm getting my glue out. This time I'm going to paint over the background because there's nothing else that I want to really do here. I just want to get these pressings on. If you want to be a little bit more careful, you can do this on a separate sheet of paper or some newspaper, paint them directly onto the pressings, and then the glue won't actually touch your page. This is a hazel catkin here that I'm putting onto the top. At the time that I was doing this, there was a lot of hazel catkins out. Now, the hazel trees are in leaf. Gradually I'm working around my page. All of these pressings that have been softly laid down are now receiving their first layer of glue, Most of them will then receive another layer of glue over the top. Here is this page. I've left a few areas blank so you can see that background and tried to cluster them mostly towards the bottom of the page. It was really a bit of fun, but I'm very happy with the result. Now I've got to let it dry. Now, do you remember those celandine petals that I put into the press earlier? I took this reference photo at the end of January in a particularly sunny spot. First I'm sketching out in graphite how I want this to look. One large flower and a few leaves. To help with the painting, I'm going to use a fine liner here. I'm using a Derwent line maker in sepia, just to go around those outlines, and then I'm going to remove the pencil lines. My Inktense set is back on the table, and I'm mixing up a nice kind of dark teal colour with a hint of brown in it. I'm going to use this to make a kind of interesting dappled background. I want it to be semi-abstract, to reflect the areas of shadow around that celandine, but also I want to include some metallic elements to represent the coming of the sun. I've painted all of these dark green areas in, and I'm doing this in a kind of patchy way. It's not intended to be exactly realistic. I am going to put a lot of detail into the paintings of the celandine leaves, but with all of this area, I just want there to be an interesting texture and contrast for the petals to stand up against. To contrast with this dark green, I'm using a much lighter green. I want to have a bit of a range of different greens to create that textured background. This time I'm allowing there to be hard edges between the different areas of colour, whereas in the one that you saw before, I used the wet technique to blur everything together. I really wanted to have some sort of metallic element on this. I thought about gold leaf, but then decided to go back to my Scrim watercolours. I chose a rose gold paint for this. I wanted there to be a little hint of red in here because the background as it currently stands is quite cool. I think that using this particular colour of metallic really brings a little bit of a contrast in colour. Notice also that I've chosen a contrast in shape, where all of the leaves or the effect of the leaves kind of has these jagged edges. When I put in these areas of metallic, I wanted to have a kind of circular spherical feel to each of these blotches of colour. I want them to stand out in many ways as being different from the leafy background, something to represent the hope and the colour that was coming at that time at the end of January. I think that using the metallic paint really works, gives this wonderful shimmer, and it really does that. It really shows that there's something different happening here. It takes it away from just being another lifelike picture of a celandine plant. My next step is to actually start really using those celandine petals. And this is what I'm trying to do. I'm taking those petals out of the press and layering them to create kind of a scale-like effect. But when you step back, you just see the bright colour of celandine. Of course these are going to fade over time, but that's all part of the process for me and part of the joy of using natural materials in my journals. I'm painting each leaf first with the EVA glue. Once I've got a coat of that EVA across the whole petal, then I start to pull flowers from my press. I'm carefully holding the flowers and just pulling the petals off of them, and then pressing quite quickly that petal down onto my glue. It's a fiddly process. It took quite a few hours to complete this page. I hope you enjoy watching me a little bit more. I hope you enjoy watching this more than I enjoyed doing it. There was a lot of frustration with trying to keep the petals going in the same angles and the angles that I wanted them to go. I just want to show you here how I made the centre of the flower. All of the petals had been used to create the petals, and I was left with the centres all sitting in the press. So what I decided to do was to make a ring around the central part of the flower, which I've painted, to try and show these middle parts with the stamens. It's worked very, very well. To have that contrast with all of the petals made of petals, the central ring made of the central ring of the flower, and in the very centre being painted. Thank you so much for watching this video today. I hope you enjoyed seeing these different pressing pages come together. I hope I'm going to be able to catch up a little more quickly over the next few months and not be quite so far behind. Remember, if you want to find out more about the flower pressing techniques that I use in my own nature journaling, click the link in the description to the special class at naturejournalingcircle.com, and again you can either pay for this class separately or join the membership for access to all of my classes. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.